The little stuff is that which is where nothing isn't. It fills the universe and can be otherwise called the ether. It is common to hear that the ether was proven to not exist, and in one sense that is true. However, it is also true that there are thousands of ether hypotheses of the last 2,000 years which have been proven to not be true. Specifically, when people talk about the ether being proved false, they are talking about the luminiferous ether. Pop science has taken the idea that the luminiferous ether does not exist to the extreme, turning that statement into no ether exists. This then drips down the pop science tubes until the message becomes, the universe is an empty void where nothingness exists and other universes might exist on the other side of vast stretches of nothingness. These types of ideas about the universe are dead wrong in every regard except one. The luminiferous ether does not exist. That is the only thing that they have correct. Note the repeated use of the word luminiferous in the term luminiferous ether. The luminiferous part of that term is entirely in regard to how light travels through the universe. Quoting Einstein, the man who is said to be the slayer of the ether, we may say that according to the general theory of relativity, space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists an ether. According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time. The crystal spheres. Like all of our journeys of understanding, we begin at the beginning of philosophy and rational thought. Our questions about what the universe is made from started long before the ancient Greek philosophers. However, it wasn't until the ancient Greek philosophers, like Thales, that the principles of those questions were being bounded by certain rules of logic. Thales was looking for the one in the many. Thales came to the conclusion that all things in the world are made up of water. Thales believed that water was the thing which existed in all other things, and because of the natural changing properties of water, from ice to liquid to gas, that this ability to change was the way in which all things had to change, thanks to the water that they are made up of. Later, the philosopher Heraclitus proposed that the one thing that appears to be common to all things, the one thing in the many, is change. Everything changes, given a long enough timeline. Heraclitus saw this as becoming, and becoming is a process of an object becoming a different object, A ceasing to be A and becoming B. But we didn't substitute A for B. This B is the same A. It's just not A anymore. Because of this, Heraclitus concluded that change necessarily implies a contradiction. But he also concludes that change is the most obvious fact. So it must be the case, therefore, that the most obvious fact of reality is that it is composed of contradictions. Heraclitus, now freely detached from reality, can use whatever he wants to conclude whatever he wants. He chooses to believe that nothingness is a type of somethingness. Nothing is. Everything is becoming. Reality is flux. Heraclitus's philosophy was countered by Parmenides. Parmenides accepted the initial premise Heraclitus presented, that change necessarily implies a contradiction. But Parmenides rejected the conclusion that reality is flux. Parmenides took the position on the opposite side of the change is contradiction coin, claiming that a contradiction cannot exist, therefore change cannot exist, therefore reality is static. Heraclitus had to explain why, if nothing is and everything is becoming, why it appears that things are stationary, solid, unchanging entities. Parmenides had to explain why if nothing is moving or changing, why does it appear that there are things which are not stationary, not solid, changing entities? Heraclitus answered his question by claiming that the senses are deceptive and that reality can only be known by reason in contradiction to the senses. Parmenides answers his question by claiming that there are no individual entities. The universe is one unchanging entity he calls the One. And since we think we see individual entities, that is evidence that the senses are deceptive. Parmenides' conclusion is false because of the last premise he introduced to his argument. Parmenides' starting basic principle was, what is, and what is not, and what is not can neither be nor be thought about. It is this starting premise that led Parmenides to conclude that Heraclitus was incorrect to claim that contradictions can and do exist. Given this premise, Parmenides then deduced that 1. The universe must be uncreated. The universe has no beginning. And 2. The universe must be indestructible. The universe has no end. If the universe has no beginning and no end, then the universe is eternal. Further, there can be no part of this universe that contains a void, a region of the universe where nothingness is that which is where something isn't. Therefore, 3. The universe is completely full, solidly packed, a plenum. Heraclitus' work had an impact on Plato as well. Plato did not fully agree with Heraclitus or Parmenides, so he formed a new basis for the question about the one in the many. Plato created universals and particulars. Universals are the unchanging perfect forms that particulars are trying to be, but cannot become because particulars are changing and therefore imperfect by this standard. The particulars followed Heraclitus' philosophy, but the universals do not. They are the unchanging nothing which is. To Plato, the particulars are known by the senses, and the universals are known by pure reasoning. Plato concluded his thoughts on the topic by showing that the particulars and the universals are not the same, and that there must exist two different universes or worlds, one for each. According to Plato, the world of universals is real and unknowable by man's senses, and the world of particulars is a fun-house mirror image of the real world, and the senses are only really good as children to remind us of the universals we knew about in the world of universals from where we came prior to our birth. Plato passed these ideas down to his student Aristotle. Aristotle took the names of universal and particular from Plato, but changed just about everything about them. Aristotle believed that all entities are composed of universals and particulars, and that we can mentally separate them from each other, but cannot physically remove them from each other or the entity. No matter without form, and no form without matter. Aristotle also rejected the initial premise of Heraclitus and Parmenides in regard to change. Heraclitus and Parmenides held that change is contradictory, but Aristotle did not believe that change implied a contradiction. Aristotle believed that change was understandable and that change follows from the laws of logic. Aristotle formulated the law of non-contradiction. Nothing can be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect, as well as the law of the excluded middle. Everything is either A or non-A at a given time and in a given respect. Because of these laws, Aristotle was also able to formulate the idea that change is change from something to something by some means for some end or goal, showing that the world was lawful and orderly because what a thing does depends on the identity of that thing. Because of Aristotle's views on form, matter, and causes, Aristotle had held a teleological view that everything was moving towards its own fulfillment of actualizing its potential. And because of that, it must be the case that motion must always exist, that motion is eternal. Thus there cannot be a cause of motion which starts motion at a particular point. This chain leads to the creation of Aristotle's prime mover, which is eternal, unmoving, immovable, pure form, pure actuality, immaterial, and perfect. Aristotle suspended this prime mover beyond crystal spheres which move in the heavens. These crystal spheres are intelligent and wish to be as perfect as the prime mover, but they are not pure form like the prime mover, and therefore must move. So they move in the most perfect form of motion, pure circular motion, which revolves around the earth. The crystal spheres love the perfection of the prime mover, and so it is that love makes the world go round. Aristotle, borrowing from Empedocles' elements, like fire, earth, air, and water, added a fifth element, quintessence, or the ether, which is what the crystal spheres are made from. Ether is therefore, to Aristotle, a particulate matter, which physically fills the universe. This was one of the first, if not the first, non-theological explanation for the nature of the heavens. But this non-theological approach did not last long, as this ether and the crystal spheres would soon be adopted into Christian theology, making changes to it such that those different layers of spheres became different levels of heaven. Outside the taking of this idea, nothing of value in regard to the ether was produced at this time. Investigations into the nature of the universe would not return for almost 1900 years. Nicholas Copernicus, in 1543, published his work on the revolutions of the celestial spheres, in which he presents an entirely different paradigm of the universe. Copernicus questions the nature of Aristotle and the Church's celestial spheres, suggesting instead that it is the Earth that moves. He presents a model where the Earth revolves around the Sun, and rotates about an axis which is tilted relative to the Earth-Sun orbital axis. This video is possible thanks to contributions to the Existence University Patreon by viewers like you. Thank you.